So welcome back, everyone. This is James Butler once again, and we're going to go ahead and start with our closing plenary. That will provide an overview of collaboration at the national level and two state examples from Oregon and Washington State. Just a quick reminder, you can post your questions and comments in the chat box. And we will do our best to get to those questions towards the end of the plenary. I'm going to start out now by introducing our speakers for the closing plenary. Ms. Megan McCann is a senior policy specialist with the National Conference of State Legislators. Children and Families Program. She conducts research and technical assistance in the areas of child welfare, child support and family law, and human trafficking. Her research includes the ongoing tracking of legislation in all 50 states and policy analysis to identify trends and hot topics. She is the author and co-author of numerous publications around child welfare and child support. Amber Harchuk is the Temporary Assistance to Domestic Violence Survivors Policy Analyst and the DHS Domestic Violence Co-Located Advocates Program Coordinator. She was a domestic violence and sexual assault advocate in Michigan and is committed to continued support of advocates and their roles with families. Amber will be joined by her TANF partner, Billy Burke, from the Self-Sufficiency Program Administrator, Oregon Department of Human Services. Tracy Underwood has been working in the movement to end violence against women for 16 years. In Seattle, she has worked as a community advocate at domestic violence programs and on behalf of survivors of domestic violence accessing TANF. So without further ado, you guys may begin your closing plenary.
Thank you. This is Megan McCann with the National Conference of State Legislators. I'll get us kicked off here. I'll start out with a quick just rundown of who we are here at NCSL and kind of what we do. We are a bipartisan organization serving legislators and staff in all 50 states and territories, and all legislators and all staff are members of our organization by virtue of being a part of the legislature. So we serve three main missions around that. The first is improving the quality and effectiveness of state legislators. We do this through our State Services Division that works with legislators and legislative staff on the institution itself, including professional development, rules and procedures, and ethics. We have a small office in D.C. that lobbies Congress on behalf of states and state flexibility. And then the State Policy and Research Division here in Denver includes the main policy areas you would typically see in a legislature: health, education, energy, environment, transportation, criminal justice, and my program, Children and Families, which kind of covers everything under the Human Services umbrella. And we provide research and technical assistance support in these areas. So as part of that work, I've taken a recent look at this intersection between child support and domestic violence that can sometimes not always seem the most obvious intersection out there when it comes to policy and certainly legislative policy. So I wanted to start out with a few statistics just for context, and I think we've probably heard a couple of these already today, but just to lay a little groundwork. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence in their lifetime. When it comes to child support and domestic violence, and I think we heard this statistic in the opening plenary, more than 90% of women who have experienced domestic violence say that they would pursue child support if they thought they could do so safely. A study out of the Child and Family Research Partnership at the University of Texas released a few statistics that sort of illustrate this point. 37% of surveyed custodial parents with a formal child support order reported experiencing domestic violence from their child's other parent at least once by the time their child was 3 years old. And 43% of mothers who did not have a formal child support order and who were not receiving any formal or informal child support reported experiencing domestic violence by the child's father. One point of intersection that makes this relationship so critical for, I think, this audience in particular is the intersection of public assistance programs and child support. I'll get into this more in the next few slides, and I think we've heard about this a little bit in the breakouts in the opening plenary. So I'll get into this more in a few slides, but keep the statistic in mind. More than half of families in the child support caseload are currently receiving or have received cash assistance. So to give a quick rundown, we've talked about this and heard it referenced, but this is kind of a national viewpoint of it. So with that statistic in mind, here's kind of a brief overview of cooperation requirements in various safety net programs. So as you all know, federal law requires that all applicants for TANF benefits cooperate with child support enforcement. This cooperation requirement comes with certain protections, including good cause exemptions and domestic violence waivers, which I'll talk about in a moment. With decreasing TANF caseloads, states have been looking at other public assistance programs as an opportunity to engage more parents in the child support program. 23 states currently require applicants for child care assistance to cooperate with child support enforcement, while 9 states require applicants for SNAP benefits to cooperate with child support enforcement. This is an area that we've sort of seen a little bit more movement on in the 50-state legislative tracking that I do. We've seen this sort of pop up in the last year or two in that tracking. Some of this is statutory in legislation, and some of this is regulatory. So I think we're all, most everyone, so I don't want to preach to the choir, but is familiar with these good cause exemptions. And in the breakout session we just heard about, this was a major point of discussion around how do you determine good cause and some other factors. So so good cause exemptions and domestic violence waivers are 2 mechanisms available to exempt parents from these cooperation requirements. Use of domestic violence waivers is fairly rare, as shown from data from 2015 that 33 states reported less than 1% of their TANF caseload with a domestic violence waiver, and only a handful of states reported that more than 2% of recipients were being granted a domestic violence waiver. So it's not necessarily a state-specific thing, it's the national numbers, but I think it's, we can see that it very much varies across the state in terms of how these are used and what the standard is to get a good cause exemption. So well, good cause exemptions and domestic violence waivers are safety measures available at the safety net child support crossroads. One safety measure available to state child support programs is the family violence indicator. A family violence indicator, as many of you know, is a mechanism used by child support programs to flag a party to a child support case who needs to have their personal information protected due to risks related to domestic violence, and indicates to a child support caseworker that modification or modified case management may be necessary. Again, this is another area where use varies considerably, from a low of 0.3% to a high of 22.4% of custodial parents with a family violence indicator flag attached to their support case. So I think that's sort of a little bit of background, but to get to kind of this idea of innovative programs or states doing some interesting things, or what opportunities are out there for states to collaborate and create these child support and domestic violence collaborations. So where does that happen? Child support programs, as we just heard in the breakout number 2, so if you missed that, hopefully I'll give you some interesting information, but that would be other information worth checking out. So child support programs have the opportunity to collaborate. Safe court access is another opportunity for court personnel, domestic violence staff, and child support program staff to collaborate. And then several opportunities in other entities like task force commissions, councils, and fatality reviews are another opportunity currently not being used in the child support program, but for a little bit of collaboration. So in terms of collaboration within the child support program, I think partnerships with local domestic violence programs and training of child support staff to identify and address cases where domestic violence is present is the kind of the ways that states have been doing this. And we just heard in the breakout number 2 from Texas, Vermont, and Washington with some really great ways that they're collaborating and that they're working together to ensure the safety of people in their caseload. So I'd encourage you to look up those resources as well. One of those examples we heard from is the Texas Get Child Support Safely program. And so there are better experts on the line from that program, but very briefly, this is a collaboration between the Texas Office of the Attorney General's Child Support Division and the Texas Council on Family Violence. It offers a secure website with information about applying for child support, TANF, Medicaid, child care services, housing assistance, along with other information about preparing for court and the court process and following or modifying a child support order. The collaboration has also resulted in extensive specialized training for child support caseworkers and attorneys, review and extensive revisions to child support policies and procedures, training of domestic violence advocates, and availability of domestic violence advocates in child support courtrooms. So kind of on the same lines in this preparing people for court and different procedures with court personnel is this idea of safe court access. And with the statistic that 90% of folks feel that they would apply for child support or pursue child support if they felt they could do so safely, this can be the critical point. So this collaboration between child support and local domestic violence programs can extend to courtroom staff to ensure safe access to court for victims of domestic violence who are interested in pursuing child support. Allowing for modified court procedures, extra security at the courthouse, and telephonic hearings and testimony are a few ways that states have ensured safe court access. In addition, training for court and child support staff, including bench cards and bench books for judges and their court personnel to both identify where domestic violence may be a factor and to address it safely in the court process. Some other ways or organizations in states where there could be some collaboration is in the domestic violence task forces, commissions, councils, or domestic violence fatality reviews. These are just two ways that states have been coming together to discuss these issues and how best to provide services. Currently, 20 states have a legislatively created, and that's what the map represents. So there might be some more task forces and commissions and councils, and certainly every state does have a domestic violence coalition working in the state. The states indicated are the 20 states that have a legislatively created task force, commission, or council that identifies the membership and the duties of that entity. So 20 states have one of these entities, and 30 states, on the next slide, I'll scroll down and back up. 30 states have a domestic violence fatality review process. And currently in the statutory membership, the statutorily defined membership of these entities, there is no child support program representative or specific child support representative. There might be someone from the Department of Human Services or the judiciary, but there's no specific mention of child support collaboration within these processes. So that could be a good option in terms of collaborating moving forward. So I flew through that, I think, probably too quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has about this collaboration. I think we heard about some other programs. We've got the state-specific information available if I can be of help or provide that information to anybody. I'll mention a few resources that we have that are linked here in the PowerPoint that I think will be shared with you following the webinar today. So our Child Support and Family Law Legislation database tracks all of this legislation and tracks family violence collaboration legislation. It updates once a week during session, and so we keep that up to date. We have a child support homepage with lots of information about child support policy, and I think the one that's most important, where a lot of this information came from, is our Child Support and Domestic Violence webpage, which just went live yesterday. So it has a lot more information about the things I've just discussed as well as some state-specific information. So I'm happy to answer any questions there, and then I'll just give a plug for an upcoming publication on how to talk to state legislators, a guide for child support professionals that we'll be putting together that'll give a kind of legislator 101. So I think with that, there's my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions again or provide any information if that would be helpful. So I think I'll turn it over so we can hear about some of the specific programs in some other states.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amber Harchuk. Thank you, Megan. That was wonderful. And it might be a good thing that you went through it fast because I tend to talk a lot. So hopefully we'll balance each other out on that one. Polite Burke is unable to join us today. She did have another emergency appointment come up. So that gives me room to talk even more. So I'm here today representing the Oregon Department of Human Services. I'm a policy analyst here. And I am our temporary assistant to domestic violence survivors policy analyst and also managing the DV co-located advocates program. And we'll talk about both of those as we go through this. So our Department of Human Services, just to kind of give an overview, we have 5 different umbrellas within our agency. So we have the aging and people with disabilities, our child welfare, self-sufficiency programs, vocational rehabilitation services, and intellectual developmental disabilities. I am here today from Self-Sufficiency, and Self-Sufficiency is our agency that issues out our benefit programs. So the benefits that we issue out are SNAP, which is our Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, ERDC, our Employment-Related Daycare, Refugee Services, which is cash, medical, and employment services for some of our refugees who might not otherwise qualify for benefits to help with that transition period. TANF, which is Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, that's our cash assistance program, and TA-DVS, which is the one I'm most excited about, our Temporary Assistance to Domestic Violence Survivors. So to talk about TA-DVS and what that TANF program is, that is a TANF-funded program that's intended to provide temporary financial assistance and support to families affected by domestic violence. So it's a program that we have here that works through the TANF program but is a separate offset of that helps families who are most often used when they're trying to flee abuse. It's helping those payments of things that, it's a financial support where there's other community resources that aren't available. It's a financial support to help with that. Some of the key eligibility factors about the TA-DVS program is that you do have to meet TANF eligibility. And so it does follow those TANF guidelines. Within that, there are a lot of things that we can waive to make sure that you can be eligible for this program. It's intended for families. One of the things that we cannot waive, you must have children. Because it is a TANF program, it has to meet that requirement that there is a caretaker-relative relationship in that household. One of the other factors that's unique is that you have to have a current or future safety risk due to the domestic violence. And so that can be, it's something where you're trying to flee right now, maybe you've already fled and there's a future risk, there's something going on where you have that safety risk. And then you also have to meet the Department of Human Services definition of domestic violence. And I bet you're wondering what that definition is. The self-sufficiency definition of domestic violence is the occurrence of one or more of the following acts between family members, intimate partners, or household members. One of the things that I think is really cool about this is that we are not limited to it just being intimate partner violence. It is any acts between family members, intimate partners, or household. So that opens it up to a lot of those different situations that people are experiencing. And it's attempting to cause or intentionally, knowingly, recklessly causing physical injury, emotional, mental, or verbal. Intentionally, knowingly placing someone in fear of imminent serious physical injury. Committing sexual abuse is defined in the Oregon statutes, or using coercive or controlling behavior. I think that definition was defined by statute, and it's pretty open. It opens that up for a lot of people to be able to find eligibility within the program. How it works, once you're approved for TA-DVS, your eligibility period is 90 days. In that 90-day period, there's up to $1,200 in accessible funds. Those funds, we create a safety plan. When you apply, you meet with a worker and you create a safety plan. That plan really looks at what kinds of things, when you leave today, what do you need to do? And what do you want to use this money for? You want to flee to a different state, so how are we going to help you figure that piece out and get from point A to point B? What are you needing right now? What community resource? We do a case planning in depth with them with resource referral that will refer them to different resources, whether it's housing, needing clothing items, toiletries, getting them with our co-located advocates, which we'll talk about pretty soon. Any sort of resource referral, mental health services, that all can be built in that case plan and help enhance that safety plan. Once you're approved, you request payments. Those payments align with your safety plan. We know that payment requests and safety plans can change all the time. So we're open to changing those. It's an open discussion and open conversation with that survivor about what your plan is and what happens from there. So all of your payment requests would align with that safety plan, but that can change at any point in time. We verify the payment request. One of the important things I think right now too is with that verification piece that's helpful. Housing is so limited and people request housing payments an awful lot. And so we verify all the information. So if someone's trying to rent a house, that maybe an example we had the other day was someone was trying to rent a house, but the house actually was up for sale and it was just a housing scam. And so we verify all of that information before issuing payment to not put that survivor in a worse situation where they think that they're going to this house and it'll be great and they don't have, and it turns out to not follow through. So we verify all of our payment requests. Payments are most often made to a vendor or dual payee. We don't issue out payments directly to the survivor very often because it is intended to help with the fleeing or what you're needed for your safety. And so it'll be issued out to, if you need a hotel, we'll issue to the hotel. Some examples of those are relocation costs, which is rent. First month's rent and security deposit is a really hard thing to come by. So we can help with that. U-Haul or truck rental, if you just have to get your stuff from here to wherever you're moving to, we can help with that piece. Gas and hotels along the way. Lock change. Sometimes the payments requests are something so simple as just changing the locks or getting a P.O. box so you have a protected address. Emergency motels, storage fees, payments we do, buying security cameras, helping to do different, whatever that family is needing that we're able to issue with, helping them get that payment to stabilize whatever that stabilization looks like for their family. Through that, we do a lot of collaboration with local domestic violence and sexual assault agencies. And what that looks like is we have our DHS Domestic Violence Co-Located Advocates Program. Those advocates are contracted in the Department of Human Services, Self-Sufficiency, and Child Welfare offices across the state. Every office in the state has a co-located advocate. And some of those benefits specifically in self-sufficiency and tying back to that TA-DVS piece is our advocates will help us in creating our safety plans. Because our safety plans are more, the self-sufficiency plans are more tailored to, here's $1,200 and what are we going to do with it? What do you need to do? What's your plan to stay safe? And the advocates can go into those details because they are the experts and help figure out what is the specific thing that you're needing in your domestic violence situation. You're still in the home. What day are you going to actually leave the home? How does that look for you and your family when you're trying to leave? And help us in supporting and creating those plans. They participate in meetings with DHS workers and survivors. So when we're meeting with survivors and maybe they need additional support, we're having a hard time understanding, they're having a hard time communicating, they can participate in those to be there for that survivor and to help with that conversation. It's a huge resource for them to also give resource referral, to be there to give that additional support to the worker, maybe ask a question in a different way. They help survivors trying to access those TA-DVS funds. So our advocates have an understanding about what the child welfare and self-sufficiency practices look like. This is how the system kind of works, and they act almost as a translator to them to explain these pieces. They help if a survivor says, I need to move. They can break down, let's look at what payments that really looks like for you, and then here's how you would talk to DHS about getting that. Here's how you would do that piece. They do training and education for our workers. They provide our domestic violence 101 training that's required for all DHS employees. So they help with that training. They can do training one-on-one. They can do training in a monthly meeting with the staff to kind of help, giving out reminders, making sheets or reference guides, and giving those out so they help with that. And then also secondary trauma support and advocacy for self-sufficiency and child welfare workers. So they're there as a confidential advocate specifically for our survivors, whether that is somebody coming in for services or whether that is the actual DHS workers themselves. Services, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the services for advocates are almost limitless. They do so many wonderful things, including safety planning, risk and fatality assessment, shelter, support and referrals to even more community resources, confidential advocacy services, and we'll talk about why that confidential piece is so significant for us, and restraining order help. Again, that's not limited to. Some cool things about our co-located advocates. This is September from 2016 to June 2017. Our advocates in the state of Oregon helped over 6,000 new families. Ongoing families during that time period, they helped almost 5,000 additional families. And that additional number, what that really means for us is when you're helping a survivor, there's sometimes mom that comes in or sister that comes in or someone else in the family that is affected by that, or additional families that are a piece in that. Maybe it was a roommate situation and there's multiple families together. Those additional families are where that number comes from. Again, almost 5,000. Over 10,000 safety plans in the course of 10 months. That's an incredible number about the services that they're providing, with over 2,000 direct service hours provided specifically to just DHS survivors, and with an average monthly families of 1,047. What the big piece about them maintaining relationships that's really helpful is this top part where I said we come back to confidentiality. That's it, explaining privilege. Oregon just recently, a couple years ago, got privilege through statute, saying that our advocates are privileged. And for anyone who is not familiar, privilege means that they basically are a lawyer and they can't share any of that information in the same way a lawyer can. So we can share as much information with our advocates as possible, and they can't give that back without a very time-sensitive release with very specific what the information is, why you need it, and who it's going to. So that piece is very hard for some people to understand because our advocates do function much differently than any other contractor that DHS typically works with. So them explaining that piece and the why that's so important for survivors, that they have a safe location to go and talk about those very personal details, is huge. So that helps with maintaining relationships. We have domestic violence points in our offices. That's in Child Welfare, Self-Sufficiency, and our Aging and Persons Disability Office. Those points know the updated policies, they're trained in domestic violence, and they know the procedures and the processes around domestic violence. They build relationships with our advocates, and they work together to create training, to be support for the office, to be support for each other, and help with those relationships. Our advocates will attend DHS staff meetings. We have quarterly meetings with leadership community partners that they come to and represent at, where we talk about these contracts that we have and what does that look like and how is the body of work really doing. They'll send emails and hot topics, trainings, updated information out to the DHS staff. We give them access to our email and our instant messaging system so that they're in the state system to be able to send that information. They participate as an advocate and give the advocate feedback in DHS meetings, work groups, domestic violence councils, and different trainings, different settings where they're able to give that perspective and really be survivor focused. And they provide continual expertise in domestic violence services. We also work with our Family Support and Connections program, which is working with TANF families in the self-sufficiency program. Family Support and Connections is really huge. Some of the benefits of that, what it is it's an in-home advocate that can come to you and kind of help your family with the things that they're needing for stabilization, not just related to domestic violence. So it can encompass that, but it reaches out even further. They strengthen families and support effective parenting. They can do court-ordered parenting classes in-home, one-on-one with parents. Parents understand and use effective and nurturing child behavior techniques. They can look from an outside perspective at that relationship you're having with the child and say, okay, here's some tips and here's some tricks and things that we can do. Parents are able to get household items such as cleaning supplies, diapers, bus passes, transportation funds, some of those little things that can add up and not be so little. They have discretionary funds to be able to help give those resources. and support for parents to help with child abuse prevention. So really looking at, we're going to give you that support ahead of time. We're going to give you the support that you're needing and that you're wanting to build your family around what your goals are and what you specifically need. Some of their services, again, included but not limited to, because they do so many wonderful things. They do family assessment tools and go through the whole family assessment to see where they're at. Budgeting techniques, organization techniques, parenting support, supporting family needs, access to further resources and referrals. A big piece of that is that they help with that. Access can sometimes be hard, and it's hard to navigate a resource and how do I get there, and they can actually do it with them and help guide them in that. Transportation services, kindergarten readiness, and then multi-layered services to homeless families. They do a lot of work with our homeless families to be able to get stabilization and help through that piece. Some of their statistics and really awesome things that they're doing from October 2016 through September 2017, almost 3,000 total families were referred to that program, and 2,519 families were assigned. I think that's a really cool number. We refer a lot of people. Sometimes families don't engage after the referral was made. Sometimes it might not be the right fit for them. That's a very small number of people that were not able to engage and that were not assigned to that program. So that's kind of incredible. Number of children served within that is 3,280 children served over that time period and through the Family Support and Connections program, with 23,998 direct service hours. So a lot of time looking at those numbers of families, how many hours were given to help each individual family. How they maintain relationships is with open relationship with providers. DHS has an open relationship with our providers to give technical support, give resources to them, help them through any complications that they're coming across. Some of the providers are co-located in DHS offices. Our co-located advocates are co-located in every office. Some of our FS&C, Family Support and Connections providers, are co-located. They attend DHS staff meetings to not only give feedback, but understand what is going on with DHS and what kind of things, what can we do to work together through that. They have regular access to our training system to receive our trainings and understand how DHS is being trained, what types of things we have to follow. And we also send a resource. DHS will send them resources in a listserv for providers, whether that's resources through DHS, about DHS, other cool resources that they might not know of that they can access. So I probably talked very quick, but I think I did okay on time. So there's my contact information. Are there any questions? I saw one in the chat where somebody asked if this program is available in other states. From my understanding, there's only 6 states that have a program similar to TA-DVS, and no other state runs it exactly the same. I think that we're pretty open and we've got access to a lot of different things. This program is intentionally left with a lot of openings for survivors to be eligible for the program, for what kind of payments we can authorize. It's a really cool program to give that support to people. And I'm not sure if there's any other questions that anybody had, and if not, you'll have all of our information after this, and I'll go ahead and hand it off to Tracy.
Thanks, Amber. This is Tracy. Hello, everybody. I have the privilege of getting to talk to you last, so at the end of a long day. So I will not belabor my points, hopefully, and move us through. But I work for the Washington State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. I coordinate our economic justice project here, and a big part of my job is to work closely with our Department of Social and Health Services Economic Services Administration, ESA, and that's the department that runs TANF and Child Support, among a few other things, food, the cash assistance places. And so I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about our relationship and our model and some lessons learned, and then, open it up for questions. We have been partnering with WSCDV, which is our crazy acronym for the DV Coalition, and our Economic Services Administration here in Washington have been partnering for 19 years. It's almost 20 years. 2018 will be our 20-year anniversary of working together. And it was really, our relationship was born from the adoption of the family violence option back in 1998 when Washington adopted that. And we started working together to implement an excellent program. And, you know, it's been a really great experience, and it's been, I haven't been here for the whole 19 years, but I've been here for 10 of them. And we've had our ups and downs like any good relationship does, but I think we just strengthen each year, and it really is benefiting the survivors of Washington State. We, 19 years ago, launched a huge pilot. It's called a pilot, which I might argue it's not exactly a pilot if it's 19 CSOs, which are community services offices, which is what we call welfare offices here in Washington. And so we put, so DV advocates were co-located from local programs in 19 different CSOs, and we still today have that program here in Washington. It was, we discovered a good idea after the pilot. It worked well, connecting survivors with local programs, with domestic violence advocates and experts, and having that expertise in-house in each welfare office has been really helpful. Unlike Oregon, we don't have an advocate contracted for every single office in Washington State, but the vast majority of offices do have an advocate. And for those offices that don't, many communities still have a relationship with their local programs and a good working relationship there. So that's great. We also, 19 years ago, provided domestic violence training in every CSO in the state. And while we don't go to every single welfare office anymore, we do offer regular trainings each year throughout the state in each region. Our state's divided into 3 regions, where I go and I train mostly TANF workers, but also folks in the call center, some SSI or SSDI disability folks, anybody who wants it really comes and can get the domestic violence in-person training. Some other things that throughout the years our partnership has created together. We have a Family Violence Advisory Committee in Washington State. So it's hosted by the Economic Services Administration, and it's made up of folks, TANF, Child Support, and other department folks, but it's also includes community partners, community jobs, the community colleges, and domestic violence programs, domestic violence advocates. And we get together quarterly, and it's a place where we can discuss the issues that come up for survivors in the department, for survivors who are accessing TANF or food or child support, and also a place to check in about how the existing policies are working, how that's really looking on the ground. And it's been a great way to to come together and to make the issue, visible, and it's a way to say, hey, this is important. We need to institutionalize a way to talk about this and make sure that it's working well. We also have the coalition. I host, I guess biannually, twice a year, CSO advocate get-togethers. So those are the advocates. CSOs are our welfare offices, and that's what we call the advocates who are co-located, CSO advocates. And I have the opportunity to get them together in person twice a year so that they can come together and connect about their unique positions as advocates, but who are also working within CSOs, and what they are seeing and where the issues are and where we can improve and what good ideas they've implemented, so that we can replicate that across the state, where like maybe one community is doing some really fantastic things and doesn't necessarily need to, there's no reason why we can't spread the good news, right, and get that working in different communities or certain aspects of that working in other communities across the state. So we have that opportunity. We also have something called our Division of Child Support as a domestic violence liaison group, where we have 9 child support field offices in the state, and they have identified 1 or 2 people from each office who are interested in the issue and are interested in monitoring what happens and making sure other folks in their office understand the issue and know about domestic violence and all the policies that go along with that. And we host gatherings quarterly. WISCADIV, our coalition, hosts gatherings quarterly with that liaison group. In fact, one of the presenters in a different session earlier, Nancy Copter, she's still on. She is in policy headquarters at our Division of Child Support, and she's also a member of that DV liaison group and has been a champion for survivors in the department for sure. So we all get together quarterly and usually discuss a topic and then do a check-in. How are things going in your office? What support do you need? What interesting thing are you doing for Domestic Violence Awareness Month or whatever? Like we have different topics and different things to discuss each quarter, but it's a way to come together and connect folks, again, with good ideas and to keep the issue in the forefront of people's minds to make sure that, we're all thinking about survivors in our work, because as we've seen throughout the day and we saw earlier, we work with a lot of survivors whether we realize it or not. Trying to advance, sorry. So, our work together is so important because our Economic Services Administration sees many, many, many more survivors than our local programs, our domestic violence advocacy programs will ever see. Most folks who are experiencing domestic violence don't necessarily call a crisis line or go into shelter or access a program or even know they exist, unfortunately, right? But a lot of people access TANF. And so those offices are just seeing many, many more survivors than we will ever come across in our local programs, our local domestic violence programs. And they also see survivors at different stages of their relationships, from newly struggling, a fledgling relationship that might have some red flags and some warning signs, all the way to folks who are in full crisis, which is different from our domestic violence programs, who often, don't see people until they have hit, like, the things have hit the fan and they are in full crisis. With existing policies and practices and knowledge about the issue, our folks have the opportunity to help survivors before the violence escalates. We've really, I think in Washington State, done a great job at crafting policies that are flexible and really allow workers to support survivors in what they need. And that, that makes a difference. And it could prevent a survivor from even having to call a crisis line, right, if they can get the help they need there. And inevitably, when the department commits to addressing the issue of family violence, it really ripples out into the community. The amount of training and information sharing that we're able to do together and learning that we're able to do together on the issue not only affects the survivors that come through the department, that come through looking for TANF or food stamps or child support, but all of those folks are friends and family and aunts and cousins of people out in the community as well. And when they have an increased knowledge about domestic violence, they have the opportunity to give good information and, be a good support for folks that they might know who are experiencing it as well. So we really see that it can ripple out into the community. This is a handout that I give in the training. It's sort of what the training is structured around, our one-day in-person training for TANF staff. And it's just 8 things to know about domestic violence. I'm not going to go through it. I just wanted you to take a look at it. I realized I should have sent it as a handout form to the conveners of this roundtable, and maybe I can get it to them before they show us where they're going to have all the PowerPoints and stuff, so that can be included if you're interested. But you know, we talk about power and control, and how survivors know their relationship the best. And you know, it has some other things too to talk about, like how leaving doesn't equal safety. And we talk about how dangerous it is to leave, so folks don't encourage people just to leave their abusive situation as if that will fix things. We talk about how past abuse matters, and that somebody who might not be in full crisis right now and experiencing family violence in a way where they need shelter or they need a lot of legal help because their abuser has them tied up in court or whatnot, but that abuse that they experienced 5 years ago can still be impacting them, especially financially, in terms of they don't have job histories, they don't have a diploma or a degree because they weren't allowed to get those things when they were in this controlling relationship. We also talk about how not telling is not the same as lying, which can feel really hard when people don't disclose family violence, but and you don't want to believe them when they do because they've worked with you so long. They're like, well, why are you saying this right now? But you know, we encourage folks to have some levity around that and understand that, you know, it's hard to talk about. People don't understand why they should disclose, and so all of these things, you know, go into the training that we do with folks. And the key at the bottom, you know, I really like to highlight is that, and it goes back to what I said about the welfare offices and CSOs, that like these programs are places where you're seeing so many more survivors than local domestic violence programs will ever see. And so really ultimately, we can support survivors by reducing isolation and expanding options. And that's really the takeaway that I leave when I train folks here in Washington is like, you have this amazing opportunity in front of you with the amount of people you see each day and talk to. You know, you might be the only place that person is allowed to go today, and you have all of these resources and options at your fingertips, and policy really allows you to be flexible in how you work with somebody. And so we just help folks figure out how to do that with survivors. I think that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Amber. No, Tracy, I'm sorry. Thank you so much, Tracy. I have one question, and if anyone can answer it, otherwise I will. Brett Johnson asked, what is 100% child support pass-through? Do we have anyone who can answer that question?
This is Jan Mickish, Colorado, and Colorado has the 100% pass-through. So that means that if child support pursues the non-custodial parent to pay child support, when that non-custodial parent or absent parent pays, let's say the parent pays $100 a month, 100% of that $100 goes to the TANF participant. There is no cost overhead taken out by the child support agency. 100% goes to the customer, and that child support does not negatively impact, let me put this way, that child support is exempted from income for the purposes of eligibility of Colorado Works, of TANF. And with some caveats, some conditions, it would be generally, there are several caveats, but let me just say this. If the average income from the child support does not exceed $500 a month for 6 months, and it's the average over 6 months, if it doesn't exceed $500, it does not impact eligibility. It's exempt from the income for eligibility, so 100% pass-through. And of course, if it goes over, if there are a number of things that happen that then the TANF participant may be disqualified, but that's what the 100% pass-through means. Other questions related to that?
Thank you, Jan. I was told some questions have already been answered, but thank you. I thought that was very helpful, and it was very helpful to hear it on a practice level and not just in theory and regulation and policy.
Yes, and what we have found is while it will be helpful to the customer, it really is not going to negatively impact the Department of Human Services in any way, because the average payment through child support is $50 a month. And so an extra $50 disregard on someone's income is really not going to negatively impact the county or the state in terms of expenditure of funds to support the customer.
Thank you, Jan. That was great. Does anyone else want to add to that? Okay, well, I just want to thank all our presenters and all of you who have stayed with us through this virtual roundtable. I understand we had some technical difficulties, and we apologize for that, but as we move into new technology and try to share information in different ways, being one of the first implementers, we kind of go through some of the rough spots. But by the time we do this again next year, we'll be all pros at this. So thank you for attending, thank you for staying tuned, and thank you for your patience as we had the technical difficulties. All the presenters were great. In my vivid imagination, I hear a large round of applause for the information you shared and the fact that we have how important the public benefits TANF child support SNAP are to our families who are in need and our survivors, and is a bridge to helping them to become independent. And we also had several localities, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and others who were able to share their programs and their practices. So thank you so much. And I think this went great, even with the technical difficulties, and I think you guys are wonderful for staying tuned and for all the magnificent information you shared. I'm going to turn this over to our partners. This was jointly sponsored by FISB and Office of Child Support, so I'll turn this over to Kenya and then Michael for their reflections.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I just want to say that I really enjoyed this virtual roundtable. This was one of my first times participating in an event like this, and so I thought it was done really well. I didn't feel like there was a huge impact from any technical difficulty, so please don't feel too nervous about that. And so there are just a couple of things that I want to remind folks of that I heard throughout the day that I thought resonated and apply long term. So one thing, and I think this was shared by Krista early on in the opening plenary, and it was a quote from Futures, but what I really liked about it, and I think this came up even in our session around building partnerships across domestic violence service systems as well as the agencies in health and human services that do public benefits work, that ultimately we're really trying to meet the needs of survivors, and we want to continue to reduce isolation for survivors and improve their options for safety. And so I think if we can continue to keep that at the forefront of our partnerships, our collaborations, the direct service work that we do, then I think that will help us stay focused on the mission and not get caught up in historical issues or concerns that have happened by and between different systems, and also help us just take a step back from our own internal biases or judgments about how things should happen. I liked hearing that screening is not an event, that it's an ongoing part of the process, and really thinking through the way in which domestic violence and the coercive control really impacts a person over the course of the relationship at different stages of where they are personally as well as what's happening within their family. And another thing that we talked a lot about in our session was that frontline workers do hold a certain amount of power, whether it's actual power or perceived power, over what happens with survivors. But then conversely, workers themselves may feel disempowered from what they're having to deal with and manage within their own system. So just keeping that in mind, that having that continuous, intentional, thoughtful conversation around power dynamics, how they're playing out in individual interactions as well as throughout the culture and the way that services are being provided is really important. And then the last piece is to keep in mind that some of those who are doing this work, and really a lot of us who are doing this work, whether as victim advocates or within Health and Human Services doing child support enforcement or TANF work or something else, a lot of us have either been exposed to violence as children or have been in abusive, coercive relationships ourselves. And so to keep in mind the language that you use and to stay focused on creating environments of trust, not just for the clients and the victims that we serve, but also for each other, where we can feel comfortable talking about how this work impacts our own traumatization and our own reaction to how that may play out. So those are just some reflections that are really sticking with me today, and I'll pass it over to Michael.
Great, thank you. And really appreciate all of the participation from so many different people in the child support program across the country, and the presentations that we had from really, we went coast to coast. We were in Washington State, Texas, so we were on the left coast, the right coast, and the south coast, right? So we had Vermont, we had Texas, and we had Washington all talking about their work on this. So you can't ask for more evidence that this can be done any place. To enhance safe access to child support services. One of the comments that I'm going to just repeat that Nancy Copter from Washington State made was the theme of don't ask, just tell. So the importance of those of us who are working in public service provision to tell survivors, to tell everybody who's coming through our program about the resources that are available for survivors, about the modifications to our processes that are available, so that they may be making assumptions about what's available and what's not, and we want to dispel those assumptions and really give them tools for self-determination. So those themes came through very strongly in the child support discussion, and we ran out of time in our discussion, and so our commitment is to follow up, and we'll have more webinars that are to keep digging into the kinds of changes that child support programs can make to promote survivor safety. So thank you all.
Thank you, Michael and Kenya. And I'm going to turn this over to Steve for any last-minute logistical information, especially a polling. Please answer the polls, because it helps us to create better programming and to improve from where we are. So, Steve.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. So we have evaluation questions coming through on the screen. If you could take some time and just fill out the polls to let us, as Lisa mentioned, to get some feedback from you. We also, as we mentioned earlier, there will be a follow-up in terms of the materials. There were some that were provided and allowed for downloading, others that were not. So we want to make sure that you are able to access all of the information that was provided. So we will be following up with you to let you know how you can access all of that information. And again, thank you for sticking with us for this virtual roundtable, and we look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the evening. As you answer the polls, 1 is bad and 5 is good. So it's a 1 to 5, and 1 is strongly disagree that this webinar format was helpful, and 5 is. So in case you're just, anyway, have a great evening, and thank you so very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.